Hello, and welcome once again to the Warsaw History Podcast with me, Jan Darasz. It's the holiday season in Warsaw. The metro and trams are empty-ish. Traffic is not as congested. For 2 or 3 hot months you can move around. People are actually relaxed and generally friendlier, which makes a change from the usual hustle, bustle and elbow jostling in trams and the underground metro. It's the słoiki, the jam jars, the rather pejorative term for the yuppies who have migrated to Warsaw from the provinces, or the resident Warsavians themselves who have gone home or escaped to their allotments, or even further afield, weekends away in the Mazury Lake District region, so beloved of the middle classes, and even to further afield to the Baltic coast or the southern mountains. Popular too, as always, is exchanging the Warsaw heat for foreign heat, Egypt in particular. But all the Spanish resorts that are beloved of Brits abroad are popular too. So, how did Warsavians spend their free time a century ago, if they had any free time that is? And we'll discuss on how they amused themselves. Parks, zoos, amusements, day trips and the like, especially during the summer season, when, no wonder, you try and escape the summer heat. There was always strolling in the park, and we'll start here with the Saxon Gardens. Now it's the Piłsudski Square, right in the centre of town, with the smashed colonnade of the Saxon Palace. Behind is a park fountain and a Tivoli-style folly. So far so peaceful. A welcome shade for a weekend's afternoon stroll. Originally it was a component of King Augustus II's Grand Entrance Mall, the Saxon Axis, designed between 1731 and 1748, and Mateusz Poppelman was the designer and the chief architect of the Polish Saxon capital. It was a family business, with his son Karl Friedrich Poppelman, who was instrumental in designing the Baroque facade of the royal palace that you can see from the west and from the river. The Saxon axis linked the Saxon palace with the entrance and exit point to Warsaw. On his way to Dresden, the capital of Saxony, and the King of Poland was the Elector of Saxony, his procession would pass through the splendour of palaces, barracks, parks, to show his status, lining his route in and out. But as with many projects, it was half completed, and only the parkland around the Saxon Palace was built. The gardens became the first public park in 1727, the first of its kind in Europe. The public could pay to enter. The entrance for the hoi polloi was separate, and so were the areas, designated for behaviour. The etiquette of the time, as well as the entrance fee, excluded the very poorest. There were 2 schools of thought, horticultural-wise. There was the French, Baroque, Versailles, patterned and ordered, and the English, an idyllic meadow, a private park to inspire the romantic in each of us. As with all gardens, they reflected our notion, our human notion, of bringing the Garden of Eden into the city. It was a question of what sort, and this varied with time. The eastern end had the huge Saxon Palace, with the Brule Palace, both destroyed, at the aforementioned fountains and Rococo statues. Originally there were 37 in all, allegories of history, arithmetic, justice, poetry, and the like to stimulate the imagination. 37 out of the 70, plundered by Suvorov in 1794, Marshal Suvorov, remember, remained. Then a further spate of destruction in 1944, and only 20 were left. An opera house too was also built to house 500. A grand salon was built to cater for the new fashion, based in the small theatre in Dresden. Opened in 1748, the Polish theatre traces its roots to this place, as the troupe and repertoire was in Polish from 1765. The opera house, like the Republic, was demolished in 1772. The city evolved and had no compunction to demolish and replace. It didn't have the sanctity of the old as today. The magnificent iron gate at the other end, that closed the western exit, was also demolished in 1821. It lent its name to the district Za Żelazną Bramę, which was a housing estate in the 1950s, but only the name survived. No iron, no gate. Mr. Warsaw in the 19th century was the architect Henryk Marconi. His fountains still exist, as does his water tower, and Antoni Magier's sundial, all from the 19th century. Now, Antoni Magier is our first digression. He was one of those eccentrics that Warsaw seemed to cultivate, born in 1762. Physicist, astronomer and meteorologist. Every day, for years, he would go up to his attic, his house is on Piwna Street 54 in the Old Town, and record the weather, noting scrupulously all the details. He never married and gained a reputation as a harmless and well-known eccentric. He amassed over 138,000 observations between 1803 and 1828. When the state of his health forced him to stop his daily measurements, he became a well-known figure around the pavements and cafes of Warsaw, a reader of newspapers, a collector of anecdotes, gossip, and histories stretching back decades. He collected and published these in his 1826 compendium entitled The Aesthetic of Warsaw. It's a minefield of information and knowledge that gives us a very enjoyable read and insight into old Warsaw of the 18th and early 19th centuries. So, back to the gardens. Doubtless, the major rearrangement occurred in 1944. Nothing remains but the moving colonnade housing the tomb of the unknown soldier, and excavations and an exhibition that surround it, because there's a project on the drawing board to rebuild the Saxon Palace. But the question is, who should pay, Poland or the Germans, who blew it up in 1944, together with the Brühl Palace and many, many others? The debate is unresolved so far. But the Saxon Gardens are a stroll into the historical imagination. A guide has to describe what is missing. Even so, the prime function of the garden still exists, a shade in the very hot centre of Warsaw. We'll leave the Łazienki Park for the time being and move on to Foxall. Foxall Park was another place where non-royal Warsawians could come for a stroll and other stuff. It lies off the main Krakowskie Przedmieście and Nowy Świat axis, the main axis of the city, between that and the escarpment. This property was bought together with the gardens by banker Frederick Cabrit and named after Vauxhall in London. It was always one of the most exclusive postcodes in Warsaw. The Zamoyski Palace closed the eastern side. It was opened to the public from 1776, with theatres, concerts, acrobatics, balls and dances, daytime and nighttime. With its greenery, it was a popular place to conduct secret trysts. On the 10th of May 1789, Jean-Pierre Blanchard took the first balloon flight from Foxall and started, for those who love Monty Python references, the golden age of ballooning. The first Pole to drift among the clouds, and some say not the last, was aristocrat Jan Potocki. And here we introduce our second eccentric. Although this may be a bit harsh after this brief biographical note, Jan Potocki, scion of the fabulously wealthy Potocki clan, was a soldier fighting in the wars of the Bavarian succession. He was a politician, a restless traveller wandering Europe, the Mediterranean, Russia and the Middle East, and with an equally restless curiosity about almost everything. And he was also a novelist, but more of that later. Inspired by Blanchard's first foray, he commissioned another balloon from him. In May 1790, in the presence of the king and Warsaw crowds, he was ready with his balloon on Senatorska Street. That's just off the city centre. Blanchard himself, Potocki, in full Turkish garb, Potocki's Turkish manservant Ibrahim, and Potocki's pet poodle, all piled into the basket. They rose to a height estimated at 4,500 feet and drifted westwards, landing a few miles down the line in Wola. The poodle must have loved it. Ibrahim decidedly less so. He was observed turning a sickly colour before the flight. Thus, Polish air travel was born. A few more balloon flights continued the short-lived rage. We can dismiss people like Magier and Potocki as harmless eccentrics, but there was more to them than a wave of our hands. Potocki was on the reformist side of the major political schisms that rent Poland-Lithuania at the time. He became a member of an unsuccessful Russian mission to China in 1805 and 1806. But it's as a novelist that he found immortality. Read his work, The Manuscript Found in Saragossa. It's undefinable, but it's a fantastical, erotic, picaresque, philosophical, occult tale of a set of stories that skip from one into another and back. It's a virtual book, you could say. It's also been made into a very famous Polish film, now a cult film, from 1965, so you can watch that as well. It's one of those books that defy definition, but reward reading. It was published posthumously in 1847, after his suicide in 1815. A truly fascinating man and a man of his times. For those who liked their entertainment a bit bloodier, there was the Hetza, or the circus. Built not too far from the Foxall, it was shaped like a mini coliseum and was devoted to various forms of animal fighting, bull baiting, cockfighting and the like. It had a capacity of around 3,000. The blood sports were punctuated by horse trials, acrobatics, animal training, and so on. And this lasted until it was demolished in 1842. Now, if you go to the Bracia Jabłkowcy, the Jabłkowski brothers department store on Chmielna Street, that's where it was. Other forms of blood sports have moved to the Parliament building on Wiejska Street. Much of the nightlife in 19th century Warsaw centred among others around a place called Dolina Szwajcarska, the Swiss Valley. This was a recreation park off Chopin Street in the city centre south. It wasn't big, just consisted of a few hundred metres square. But from 1786, when it was established, it went through several owners and iterations. But the formula was concerts, orchestras and bands, circus performers, and an ice rink. The prints of the era remind you of those Renoir paintings in lamplit nocturnal scenes. This too has gone. It too didn't survive 1944. The Vistula river trips were a major attraction, especially in the age of steam, and especially if the Vistula wasn't flooded or frozen. Steamboats plied up and down the river, but it's a particularly dangerous river if you don't know it. The deep holes in the riverbed cause eddies and swirls to suck down any unfortunate. One disaster occurred in 1906 when a boat, overloaded with boarding passengers and towed by a local ferry, capsized near a Wilanów Palace boarding point. This happened during a religious holiday of St. Anne that attracted thousands. The cause of this spontaneous panic was reportedly shots being fired near the church. It ensured the crowds piled onto the boat or ferry. Press reports are confusing, but the corpses were real. With dozens reported drowned, 40 were saved, but 9 corpses in the end were fished out of the Vistula. The Warsaw Zoological Gardens were opened in 1928 and today boasts 12,000 species apparently. Warsawians come to gawp at the animals, but personally, they seem to gawp back at us. Probably thinking that we are just as funny looking too. During the war, many animals either perished or were kidnapped, and the zoo fell into ruin, but for one interesting fact. A group of Warsaw's Jews found shelter in the disused pens, sheltered by the then managers Jan and Antoni Magier. This too found its way onto the big screen, and the animals now are back and thriving. Another entertainment, cinema, first came to Warsaw in 1896, and the Krzemiński brothers established their first permanent cinema in 1903. By 1905 there were a couple of dozen, operating the most basic technology. By 1911 this rose to 30, and by 1919 to 42. Sound came along in 1929, and by 1939 69 permanent cinemas were running. By the late 1920s, Polish productions too made their debut, using Warsaw's newly built estates. It was a massive attraction, especially for Warsaw's working classes. Today, the summer viewings are still very popular. The races or the racecourse were vastly popular, another meeting point within classes and between social classes. The meetings were first held on Pole Mokotowskie, a huge training area used by the Russian military. It was the sport of kings, or rather tsars, but popular with all classes. The etiquette and atmosphere were decidedly English. One of the must-sees for any lover of the Art Deco is the race course at Wyścigi, the races. The location was moved in the 1930s. It's a breathtaking set of stands, enclosures and paddocks that were completed in part for a military stud farm. The Luftwaffe during the war used it as an auxiliary airfield, so kept the buildings intact, even though they bombed the city to pieces. The communist era was, for reasons obvious to any bourgeois, saw the fabric of this magnificent place deteriorate. But when the summer season is off, you can see Warsaw's great and good acting like the English ascot. And that's not a bad thing too, injecting a bit of sartorial elegance to the races, not like the current ascot in England with drunken brawling not uncommon. Playing on a beach, anyone, in Warsaw? Surprisingly, it was yet another hugely popular pastime, especially in the 1920s and 1930s, when the social restrictions on men and women's worlds relaxed after the First World War. Poniatówka Beach near the Poniatowski Bridge and Saska Kępa on the Praga side matched Bielany on the Warsaw side in popularity. Photographs from the era show a carefree time, dancing, paddling, rowing, laughing. The Poniatówka Beach had a large wooden pier, boardwalk-type construction, and you can see this on the photos. It's one of those haunting images of Warsawians just enjoying themselves after the First War and all its turbulence. We know what they do not on the photographs. And maybe that's what Warsaw has lost for decades, a lightness and gaiety of being. But at least the paddling and the bar-going and the barbecues are evident in summertime on those very beaches. It's difficult to describe a world before television or personal mobility, when you could just pop into your car and go anywhere you fancied. Those with money could always escape the summer heat, but the poor or working classes? It's also difficult to convey the impact a railway line had on personal mobility in the 19th century, thanks to men like Cronenberg and Bloch. For a cheapish ticket you could reach Otwock, now a Swiss district on the Praga side, wander around the villas, perhaps even spend a couple of days there in one of the B&Bs, or have a rest cure. The railway stations along the way are pure 1930s deco, a bit dilapidated, but they have those swooping eagle-like wings that you can see in the later award-winning main Warsaw railway station in the city centre. Swiss architects gush at the building, but the origins lay in the 1930s. I don't know how many architects have made this particular trip though, but these stations are little gems. Campinos Forest to the north, Józefów to the south, with its restaurants and bars, were also a popular destination, all within easy tram, train or bus reach, and the price was just for a ticket. The poorer classes had Wola and Powiśle, the beer gardens, the dance halls and gardens. There was a unique working class culture that grew up in these areas. Travel generally was for the middle and upper classes. Despite the evolution of Warsaw, the working classes had limited options. Work is the curse of the drinking classes, as the saying goes. These were simple pleasures and simple tastes. A walk in Warsaw's parks, a cool drink on a hot day, enjoying the warm sunshine moment. Priceless and timeless. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope that you enjoyed the podcast. I'm Jan Darasz. Join me for the next one on Warsaw's fascinating history. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels.